Hey everybody, it's Pierre, and today we have a top 16 deck list from Bandai's last weekend's official TopCut tournament. And here we have Luciel with us to give us a quick breakdown.
Pretty good. I actually managed to take this up to top 16 for my first top in Digimon since I've started about a month and a half ago. Been to about
Awesome.
3 big events in total.
Nice. So of course, guys, if you guys want to pick up any of the cards that we talk about on today's deck profile, I have to point you guys over to 3 Mana. They have the best prices in Canada in regards to Digimon singles and sealed product, so go check them out there. But with that said, we'll just go ahead and jump right into the deck list, and then we can go card by card and hash it out. So, green, what would you call this, a control or tempo deck?
This one's more based around tempo and being aggressive, trying to finish off early compared to the typical Ceresmon control style.
Right, so I can see here like you're utilizing Argomon, which I didn't see in too many lists when it originally came out. I know you and I right before we started the video talking about how there was some inspiration on Steven's build, and I know like he mentioned like it was an aggro variant of the deck. What aspects of the deck really push it to being more of a aggro?
So mainly it would be in the fact that I guess mainly just stems from the Argomon level 6. And so it was all about trying to set up your Ceresmon so you could turbo out the Argomon and then rest a bunch of rookies while you're getting up there. So you can then swing in with, typically Argomon, I was swinging with a +3 security at least. So I would typically take out 4 security with just him alone and then finish off with 1 or 2 more attacks after that.
Mm-hmm. And then naturally here you can see he's a big beefy attacker when you include things like Kabuterimon and Gargomon to really beef up his stat line. Would you say typically you were able to beat over most security stacks without worry? I mean, aside from hitting a guy force or anything like that, of course.
Yeah, so actually Hornbuster played a really big part in that.
Mm-hmm.
So it helps me to buff them up and make them big enough to even swing over things like Omnimon without having to rely on a bunch of Sting if I needed to. And then it also just helps make Argomon 16k on average, so it was safe in security unless of course I ran into a Gaia Forest, Terror Clusters, or something of that nature.
Right. Okay, then we'll go ahead and just jump into like level by level, talk about how the deck functioned, what they did, and then from there we can go on and talk about any potential changes we'd make to the deck and where you could see the deck going from there. So in training, we have Tenamon and Argomon, and you had these as a split. Now, was this just an accessibility thing, or just more so you really like the what each one proposed depending on what Digimon you're able to Digivolve on top of them?
So it was kind of a little bit of both. I did have the access to get the 4th Tanamon, but I ended up liking the concept of being able to take the extra memory a little bit more often than just like the one time I hit the egg when it was hopefully aiming for Tanamon. But in this tournament, I'd probably it functioned pretty well, but going forward, I'd want to experiment with the 4th Tanamon instead, because there was a couple turns where that 1k mattered when I'm sitting on a champion or something and wanted to beat over a blocker.
Right. And then in the rookies, we have your typical mix of your 2-cost 3Ks. And then we have our Agumon, Tentamon, which one gives a boost, one gives the suspension of a 3k, and finally Terriermon. Your opponent can't gain memory except with tamer effects. Would you make any changes as far as your rookie lineup is, or you really liked the variance between the inheritables, the low cost beaters, and then Terriermon?
I really liked the variants for the most part, and Terriermon actually came in very clutch in a lot of the blue matchups, because it made a lot of my opponent's hands dead because they were drawing into things like Hammer Sparks and they couldn't use them to any effect. The only card that I could see potentially changing is Tentamon, and it's more of a flex spot. I ended up liking it just because it let me rest some problematic rookies that I would potentially want to swing into if they were trying to keep it safe. It could easily be an Auroramon if you wanted to go a little more aggressive, or you could even run some more Vanillas just so you could throw them out for cheap.
Yeah, especially since green is like really good at the whole memory choking aspect of the game. Explicitly because you have so many 1-cost champions. So break us down in regards to this lineup over here.
So, Vegemon was just a meta call against red. It's kind of resilient against Ultra S if they start to clear out my level 5s with Digivolve.
Mm-hmm.
And Kabuterimon and Gargo are there to make your boys beefier when you swing from your megas and champions. And a lot of people would say you run 8. I found myself being fine with the 6.
Mm-hmm.
And I found like I wasn't missing for most of the time I wasn't missing the DP at the higher levels. Sometimes I was missing some DP when I was on my champion trying to swing over things, which is where I wanted the extra Tanemons.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Stingmon, I personally really liked it. It came in clutch for extending a lot of plays where I would swing over something I'd rested with Tento, giving myself more memory to actually sometimes get up to Ceresmon or Argomon when the opponent tried to prevent me from being able to do that.
Right.
And a big thing I want to note is like the 1-cost thing was a really big focus because especially in this variant where you're focusing on getting up to Ceres and Argomon as fast as you can, your level 4s are almost never being played to sit as a body. So cards like Woodmon were not things I was looking at all.
Right, and that's actually something I noticed. Piecing the deck list together was just your omission of that. We will see Cherrymon going on to the Elmas, but did you feel like you missed Woodmon at all? Was your aggression good enough to not really have to worry about not seeing it?
It was good enough. There was some games where I did want a little bit more defense, but I was actually considering as an edit changing the Mega lineup and changing the Ultimate lineup and keeping the champions the same. I did not think Woodmon should come back, at least not in a variant focused on Argomon.
Mm-hmm. Right. Just because like the cheap evos are just so efficient at doing what they do.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well then, talking about the ultimates here, we have Cherrymon, Blossommon, and Argomon. So you're talking about potential change-ups here. What did you like and dislike about your ultimate lineup?
So the download targets were very nice, but since you're running Argomon as well, you're not lacking for targets for the most part for using Ceresmon's skill to rest things. So Argomon, obviously, he's your main facilitator because he gives the plus security attack to Argomon because you can play a rookie suspended when you're attacking to give yourself an extra security if you didn't have enough rested on board to give it to you. And then the Blossommon is actually where I was thinking about making changes. Is I was considering cutting Blossommon down to 3 so I could put in an extra Cherry, just to give myself a little bit more defense. Because Cherry was a really nice body to sit on, just because of that 7k DP. Especially when he had stuff like Kabuterimon and Agumon underneath him, I could, if I needed to swing with him, I could clear bodies relatively easy rather than just keeping him as a blocker. And sometimes I found myself actually staying on him based on the board state rather than going up into Ceres or Argo.
Right. 7k DP is also like a really sweet spot just because there's a lot of like really strong 6k DP champions and ultimates, and Cherrymon is just at that awkward spot where it's just 1k more to make them have to work for it as opposed to just being straight up a free trade when we're considering the level 4 blockers. And then jumping over to the mega slots, we have a spread of Bancho Stingmon, Ceresmon, and Argomon, which interestingly enough, you don't see too often on in green lists. But of course, this one being a more aggro oriented. What are your takes over on your megas lineup?
So obviously it's green, so we want to use Ceresmon as much as possible, and then she in turn is kind of the enabler for Argomon, because it allows you to, for one of your downloads when you're climbing up, to use an opponent's card, which sometimes you don't want to do because Argomon does gain those security checks from your own rested Digimon. And a lot of times you have low-cost rookies, so you won't really want to swing with them because the odds are they'll probably die in security. So it's kind of a balance between those two, figuring out when you want to use her cost to rest one of your own Digimon versus one of theirs. And in terms of Bancho, a lot of people will either choose to not run it or run it at 1, because despite how good it is against certain decks, such where they have like 12,000 base DP bosses, it can be a really dead card into yellow.
Mm-hmm.
One of the options we run made him much better against yellow, in the sense that I could use it to beat over things without having it necessarily die, so it wasn't kind of a dead card because I had Hornbuster to make him bigger.
Right. So then jumping on over to actually the options in Tamers, Hornbuster is an inclusion that I feel sometimes people run, or they just say like it's totally not worth it. But I think, especially in a world where Omnimon is such a dominant strategy, I think it's a really significant card in being able to allow you to at least clear out an Omnimon much easier than having to rely on like 5 rested Digimons on a Kabuterimon or something like that.
That is very much the case. But another thing that allowed me to do was a lot of times people would think they had a Digimon that was safe rested on the board based on how much memory they gave me, and that I couldn't clear it. Especially against blue, because they would swing with jamming and stuff, and so a lot of times they'd have a rested Paladramon,
right?
And that was be sitting on a Kabuterimon at 1 memory with an Agumon underneath. So I'm 6k, and they're like, okay, I'm safe. And then the Hornbuster would allow me to clear their threat, and then they have to start trying to build up that stack all over again. So it was also nice for some players at the lower levels, just to help clear out problematic stuff that they didn't necessarily see coming. And then obviously it's there to help you secure your plus security attacks later on once you do hit Argomon.
Yeah, the one cost is like super essential, and it wasn't even something that I'd considered, but actually my opponent did that to me all the time during the tournament as well, where they were just sitting on their ultimates because they thought it was safe, because like you said, at 1 memory there's not much you can do, but Hornbuster, for as cheap as it is, can really allow you to throw your opponents off if they're not expecting it.
And especially with the addition of Stingmon that I made to the list, I found it a lot of times it just ended up being free.
Right.
Because it'd be sitting on a Argomon specifically. A lot of times people think they're safe against it just because it's sitting there at 6,000, but it helped a lot. Especially when I didn't necessarily have DP boosting skills below it, and they're like, "Oh, I'm definitely safe," and then the Hornbuster comes out.
Little do they know. And finally, as far as the non-Digimon go, we have Mimi as a 2 of. What specifically are we teching in for this? Is just because obviously there's the plays where you can push in more aggro from your beating area based on having a level 5 on board. But why tech her into like an aggro variant deck?
So mainly it's to give you more targets to rest to gain security attacks for Argomon, without having to sacrifice the aggression that you have with your other Digimon on board.
Right.
Because you could use it to attack, in which case I'm swinging with a rookie that's probably going to die, but usually I would use that extra body I put on the field to rest, to give Argomon the higher security attack, and then obviously with him boosted by Hornbuster, there's only Gaia Force can stop him effectively.
All right, then jumping back onto the overall deck list, what would you see yourself pivoting to or making changes to moving forward with the deck?
So, I mean, the main thing is I definitely want to try out increasing Tanemon to 4. So originally before testing, I was honestly considering Mino over Tane, because I know a lot of people are flip-flopping on that card choice.
Yep.
But specifically in this build, because you're trying to attack face more often than you are clearing their field, Tanemon was much better. So I definitely stick with Tane over Mino, at least for this variant where you're focusing on Argomon a little more. But I would definitely bump him up to 4, because while Argo was nice for gaining memory, with the inclusion of Stingmon, I still had that nice ability to gain memory when I needed it.
Right.
And the plus 1000 DP mattered a lot, because it would allow me to not have to have Hornbuster sometimes to make Argomon safer.
And what was your toughest matchup throughout the entire weekend?
Rookie Rush.
Yeah.
It was so interestingly enough, the 2 decks that I lost to, I ended up with a 6-2 record. One was Rookie Rush, and the other was the Red Omni player who ended up coming in second. And Red Omni is a tough matchup, but this deck was kind of engineered to mitigate your struggles in that matchup through Argomon. But it ended up not mattering because I bricked that game. So the only game that was really a struggle and not just me misplaying or bricking was Rookie Rush. And while this deck is aggressive, Rookie Rush is probably the best deck in the game at that. And specifically because of the lack of Woodmons, you don't really have a way to crib the aggression, so you can gain the tempo back. And Rookie Rush was one of the matchups that was tempting me to sub out some Blossomons for more Cherrymons. Because Cherrymon ended up, when I did see him, he was very good in that matchup. And bumping him up to 3, or I mean, I could maybe even potentially C4, could definitely go a long way towards that matchup. Especially when he has a 7k body, so there's 6k champions can't clear it.
Yeah, definitely. Did Terriermon put enough, right? Because I had a tough time with a couple of Rookie Rush matchups, and it just so happens that, you know, clearing a Hammer Spark insecurity often is what spelled the death of me for that game. Did Terriermon find itself in like any of those clutch situations against that matchup specifically, or it was more the go big blue decks?
Unfortunately, I didn't really see Terriermon into Rookie Rush, but it would have saved me, probably in both games if I'd managed to see it.
Right.
Against the bigger blue decks like Little Forest and Imperial, which I did face, I think at least 2 of each, Terriermon shut them down completely, and in my opinion, it was actually the, I probably sometimes wanted to see Terriermon even more than Aggro, based on the matchup.
Right.
Just because you have DP gain in other areas through Hornbuster and Gargo and Kabutery. But yeah, Terriermon was definitely the rookie I found myself wishing for the most.
So we don't see HPD in the deck. It doesn't use it at all, and that makes sense since you're a very download-oriented deck. Do you think that once the restrictions do come on at the end of the month, obviously you're going to have to go down on the ultimate level Argomon, but since you were already deciding to mess around with your ratios using Blossomon, would you say that the deck is definitely a viable strategy pushing forward past the April restrictions?
Unfortunately, a large part of this deck revolves around that ultimate inheritable. And so with that going down to 1, this specific variant kind of flatlines. And you're probably going to have to go back to a more Ceresmon focused build where she's the main boss and you're just focused on clearing while you build up enough people to swing out. I could definitely see the level 6 Argomon still maybe seeing player being included. But you'd probably want to balance the deck out a little more and maybe consider adding stuff back in, like Woodmon, for example, just to give yourself a little bit more defense. Because Argomon could still work and give you tools to close out the game, but it'll definitely be less reliable now that you can't count on seeing that Argomon inheritable for a free plus security.
Right. Because being able to set that up is definitely what helps you being able to actually push in for the damage when you're ready for it. All right, well, with that was basically the deck, and honestly, green I think is in a really awesome spot. I think, you know, we saw a couple of deck lists do well in the top 16, and I think, you know, even post restrictions, we can see that this list didn't run HBD, and even if it did lean very hard on the Argomon inheritable, I think it just speaks to the power of being able to do all the download shenanigans that green can do, and puts itself as a really good contender going into the meta post ban list at the start of April. With that said, Luciel, do you have any shout outs that you'd like to give before we close out the video?
I mean, I have to give the shout out to Choose Steven for the inspiration for the deck list. Other than that, not really.
And guys, if you like deck profiles like these, then hey, give it a thumbs up. Hey, if you dislike it, give it a thumbs down. If you watch more of these kinds of videos between gameplay, profiles, all that jazz, subscribe button's in the corner. And with that said, we'll catch you on the next one. Ciao.